those moments. I think what I learned is don't mess with nature. It's stronger than you, and you should learn to contribute with it instead of fighting it. And that's what I promised to myself before this trip, that respect the mountains, because you don't know what difficulties you can get during your trip.
Yeah. What did your guide say to you when you returned?
He was very angry.
Hello, I'm Alan Hill. In this podcast series of the Nostalgic Vagabond, we're talking travel, all kinds of travel, with all kinds of interesting people from all around the world. In conversation, we'll share personal anecdotes, tales of adventure, and maybe misadventure too. Listen in for some unique cultural perspectives, tips from seasoned veterans, and an array of diverse experiences that have contributed to many life-changing journeys. Travel really is a privilege. We know that now. And if we can't do it right this very moment, let's talk about it then. Hey, where are you right now? On this episode of the Nostalgic Vagabond podcast, I talk with Zsófia Sáfár. She's from Hungary and currently bases herself in Budapest and sometimes in Italy. Zsófia is a journalist and has written for multiple print and web publications. She describes herself as a beginning traveller, but from that beginning, she has thrown herself in the deepest of deep ends. Like cruising with strangers on a digital nomads cruise ship, and then backpacking around South America as her first solo trip. And from there, things continued to go up, literally. In conversation, Zsófia shares her motivations for trekking to Everest Base Camp at the start of 2020. This kind of trip is all about pushing the limits of your fears, physical abilities, and inner stamina. Being organised is important too, but sometimes things don't go according to plan, and 2020 was definitely the year for that. From experiencing altitude sickness on the mountain passes, to not having the best equipment, to getting lost on the biggest mountain in the world, this trip was certainly a grand adventure, as Zsófia explains. And because Zsófia is used to being the interviewer and not the interviewee, I figured, why not let her ask me a few questions too? Anyways, let's get to the conversation. Zsófia Sáfár, thanks for coming on the Nostalgic Vagabond podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
Where are you right now?
Currently, I'm in Italy with my partner who moved back home from the UK after the pandemic or the coronavirus outbreak. Originally, my plan for the second half of 2020 was to explore Europe. Well, instead of that, now I am happy to be able to travel back and forth between Hungary and Italy. I am lucky to have a location-independent job and that I can bring work everywhere with me. So since last spring, I spend my time either with my family back home or here in northwest Italy.
We actually met in a nice cafe in Budapest.
Yes.
About a year and a half ago, nearly. And we bonded over traveling and writing and being creative. Can you just tell the listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you love travel?
Hey, well, I'm a journalist. I have been working for a Hungarian online lifestyle magazine for almost 7 years. Occasionally, I write articles for other mediums too, for example, National Geographic Hungary, or a print magazine that focuses on psychology and well-being. Topics I write about are mostly whatever interests me, let it be mental and physical health, the importance of philosophy, social and global issues, moral dilemmas, and travel. Yes, traveling, I consider myself as a beginner traveler since my first big trip happened 2 years ago when I went to South America and spent 4 months there backpacking. The answer to the question, why do I travel? Well, that adventure to Latin America was triggered by a personal life crisis. And I felt like I really need to change the environment. I needed to take a big step in a different direction to get out of my comfortable everyday life. So I literally made a big step when I decided, okay, I go to South America. And now I'm glad to say that it was one of the best decisions in my life I took.
It's quite an extreme take, I would say, for most people for their first real big adventure to go from Europe to South America. I'm curious, did you go solo? Did you go by yourself?
Most of the time, yeah, I traveled solo, but leaving from Europe, I wasn't alone. Basically, I joined to 500 people traveling on a cruise ship from Barcelona to Brazil. This is a specific, it's called a nomad cruise.
Nomad cruise.
Yes. It's a conference cruise ship where many people from different fields, I mean, entrepreneurs, writers, photographers, so people, the so-called digital nomads who can travel and work at the same time. This is their, so I think it was, 13 days long cruise ship on the Atlantic Ocean, which was a great adventure just itself, the whole conference. As I love my me times, socializing can burn me out a lot.
Wow, okay.
So traveling with these many people and taking part in these different programs, nothing was compulsory. Acro yoga, music jamming, workshops and keynotes and many kind of programs you could take part in. And the fear of missing out, that so-called FOMO, that was always around in the air, because I realized that I have to let my fears go when you have that inferiority complex that you're surrounded by all these successful people, businessmen, and who are you? What are you doing here amongst these people? That after a few days, I could let it all go, and I just enjoyed the moment. I got really inspired by this community.
Right.
It was a great adventure.
So it took you a few days to get into the rhythm of being away from home and being outside your comfort zone and pushing yourself to realize the new you. Once you arrived in Brazil, you said you were in South America for 4 months. Can you just say a little bit about the kinds of places you visited and what were those experiences like for you?
So first of all, I did not plan well ahead this trip. I knew which countries I would want to visit, and most of them I managed to visit at the end. So Brazil, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. And the first week, when we arrived to Brazil, we spent the first week together with some of the nomads I met on this cruise ship. And after that, everyone could decide where. Some people traveled back to Europe, some stayed in South America. I made friends whom I visited later in another country. So the first few weeks I spent in Brazil, I started looking options for, work away. I traveled a low budget,
of course,
and I like getting ideas or when I kind of organize my travels, what options I have. So I looked for workaway, couch surfing, Airbnb, but it's not about because I could afford. Staying in not a hotel, because I don't like the vibe of the hotel. I like meeting up with locals and spending time with people to see how they live their lives. So that's why I choose these options for the authenticity. So yes, first week with all these nomads, then I spent a week 1,000 kilometers away from this paradise, like beach paradise. I traveled to a hidden village somewhere the southern part of Brazil. It was a camp in a fishing village, which I looked after and helped the hosts. However, it wasn't my idea to spend Christmas and New Year's Eve in Rio de Janeiro, because I had this preconception that me and a city like Rio, it's too totally it's different. Yeah, it was, the idea was too much. But when I had the news that 50 people from this cruise ship are spending the Christmas and the New Year's Eve in Rio de Janeiro, then I thought it over, and I went there, and 2 weeks in Rio. It was amazing. At the same time, I was homesick. I really missed my family, because it was my first Christmas far, far away from my home, from family and friends. And when I was Skyping with people at home, why are you moaning and crying? You are at Copacabana Beach, 30 degrees. We are here in the freezing winter. We are all jealous to stop this. It was hard at first, emotionally and mentally, to get used to this lifestyle of you don't know what happens next day. You constantly have to be alert.
Sure.
So yes, places I would say that I tried different, like staying in a village, staying at the beach, and in Rio de Janeiro in the center, in the party area. Mm-hmm. So that was the first month in South America.
So when I met you, this was after you'd had your experiences in South America, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it wasn't long after we had that cup of coffee in Budapest. By the way, I still owe you a cup of tea. So next time I see you, it's my turn to buy the drinks, okay?
Okay, I can't wait.
A few months later, after we met in Budapest, you went away again. You went trekking in the Himalaya, which I've never done before. I'm very intrigued about this idea. I'm curious to your motivation as to why you went there. You said the first time you went traveling in South America was because there was a big turning point in your life.
Yeah.
And so you went to, in a way, a kind of extreme first experience, going that far away from home to a completely new culture on your own, but discovering a network of people at the same time. Why did you go trekking in Nepal?
So after my first big trip, even when I was in the middle of traveling in South America, I knew that my next destination will be somewhere far east. But that was only a vague idea yet. However, at the same time, I was dreaming about this next trip. I knew that it must include Nepal because of the culture I'm very interested in. Mostly when I travel, it's the traditions, the habits, and the lifestyle I want to get dwelled in. Mm-hmm. And also, I realized that reading books and watching documentaries is not enough to get wiser and wiser. You have to put yourself in certain situations to push the boundaries, the limits of your physical and mental and emotional state of mind. So I thought, why not? Once I'm in Nepal, why not trying to do something extreme, which I have never done. So, and not long before I left, I was listening to a summit climbers speech in Budapest, and that was the last kick in the butt to say. So, yes, I have to do it.
I assumed that you had all this hiking experience, perhaps, because in Europe, especially in certain parts in Europe, there is a real hiking culture, and a lot of people hike all the time. And I just assumed that, Zsófia, you were a hiker, but are you saying you went to Nepal and hiked for the first time in that kind of terrain?
That was, really a big step from, well, if you think in my country, the highest mountain is 1,014 meters high. So that is not a big challenge to take. And the second Well, it was a warming up experience in Italy, northern Italy, when I first came here, solo traveling just for a week backpacking. And then I was hiking on Monte Baldo, which is I reached 2,200 meters. So that was the next grade. And then the third grade was in Peru when I took the 4-day-long Inca trail, the classic Inca trail, which included visiting Machu Picchu. And the highest peak was 4,200 meters there. So that was my record until this next step in Nepal.
Okay, so you weren't raw at all. You had done levels of mountain climbing, and starting from 1,000 meters in basically flat Hungary, going up towards the Andes. I mean, the Andes is a decent mountain range. So in a way, you had kind of prepared yourself for walking in the Himalaya. I feel more sure that you're not as crazy as I might have thought for a second there.
But it wasn't the consequently organized travel. It just happened, and I still feel, because my fitness, I have an average fitness condition, and I thought I would have some struggles, but I was doing okay.
Especially with long distance endurance activities, because I've done a marathon before, and I've done some shorter distance half marathons and just long distance runs in general. And there's a lot to be said about your mental stamina as well as your physical stamina, because I think personally, when it comes to endurance, it's all about what's in your head. It's all mental.
Yeah.
If it's painful, if it hurts, if it aches, that's okay. You can get past that. And so that's why you need to have that strong mental strength, which in your case, it seems you possess a lot of that. You say you're an average hiker per se, but maybe you're well above average in your mental stamina and your mental endurance, and you can push yourself beyond your limits, whereas other people are too scared to do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. You need to be mentally strong as well. Some people would just say you're crazy, you're irresponsible, you're very brave. I would just call myself curious, and the next step is not enough. When it's done, you want another one. So as far as I can judge my capacities and I feel okay, I just go forward and nothing can stop me.
Yeah. Nepal and trekking through that area, was that something you've always wanted to do, in the sense that, is that a bucket list thing, or was that something that kind of just inspired you after your trips in South America?
I don't have a bucket list. I kind of go with the flow, but I do need sometimes a big amount of adrenaline, and this was something that kind of made me, it was a rebirth or something that added so much to my perspective or the way I look at myself or life itself.
How did you go about organizing this trip? Is it something you did solo, or did you go with an agent within a group, or did somebody take care of all of the logistics for you? How did you manage the practical things?
At first, I thought about teaming up with a group of people, like-minded backpackers. So when I arrived to Asia, it was the end of January last year. So, and that was the day when I arrived to Thailand first, and then I went through Malaysia to Nepal. The day I arrived, got the first news about a virus killing people. And that I didn't have a clue what was going on in the world. And I was in a dilemma to stay and do this 2 months long travel or go back home. But I stayed. And during, so when I arrived to Thailand and then went to Malaysia, that's when I started to organize my next country programs and adventures. So I started looking for local agents, tour and trekking operators to see, and there are plenty in Kathmandu, in Nepal.
Right.
After my experience, I would say that you can do it without a tour guide, but not on your own. There were people on their own trekking in the Himalayas. I wouldn't do that, but with friends or with someone else, it's kind of safe and doable. So I found Magical Nepal, a tour operator, and due to the coronavirus, there were no other tourists. All the tourists, they canceled their previously booked trekkings because everyone was scared of this virus. It was the date when I started trekking was 1st of March. So Nepal was still safe. No cases were, as far as I remember, but that was during my trekking when they started shutting down things.
Yeah.
So it was only me who actually booked. Only me. I wanted to book a group trekking, but then they warned me it might be only you and your trekking guide on the trip, and that's what happened basically. So it was like a private trek. And I'm kind of lucky because it wasn't overwhelmed the same trails where there are thousands of people every day when the hiking season starts. It was very so-called comfortable, and even in their accommodations in the tea houses where we stayed, not many people.
You basically got a private tour, but not for the cost of a private tour.
Exactly.
Because you were the only one, well, you could say brave enough or silly enough or crazy enough to not go back home during the pandemic, but to continue with your plans. And everybody else had decided to go home and cancel their plans.
Yeah.
It must have been surreal being on these trails, and I suppose with far fewer people than there normally would be.
Yeah, it was bizarre, and at the same time, you did not have Wi-Fi access. You didn't know what's going on in the world. You couldn't check news relating to this issue. Our tour guides, they had access at some points to Wi-Fi. So whatever I knew during my it was only 10 days long, the trekking. I knew it from some words of my guide. It was weird. And after I got back to Kathmandu from the trekking, few days after they started canceling flights back to Europe, my flights were canceled, and they started shutting down everything. So I could manage to do this trekking, but was very lucky.
You almost got stuck at the end. Did you say the tour company was called Magical Nepal Tours?
Magical Nepal, that's
Magical Nepal.
Yes.
Okay. I'll have to look them up. Something that I always am curious about in my own biology, in terms of mountain climbing, is this idea of altitude sickness. The highest I've ever been climbing is not actually that high, because I'm from Australia and we have a high mountain. Well, it's higher than the highest mountain in Hungary, but it's still a small hill in comparison to many other mountain ranges in the world. I think it's a little bit more than 2 kilometers high, which isn't that much. So I am curious about this idea of altitude sickness. Now, do you recall the highest point you reached when you were trekking in the Himalaya? And did you experience this altitude sickness at any time?
Yes, I did have some sickness, which was the symptoms were short of breath and splitting headache here at
in the back of your head.
Yes, that's what they say. That is the sign of when you have to stop and either turn back and go lower, or just stop and wait for your body to acclimatize.
Acclimatize. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
And it was when we reached 4,200 and over that. Before that, we had some stop over in the same altitude, so we let our body get used to the. But at one point, exactly on the same day, when we decided, okay, instead of 12 days, let's do it in 10 days, the whole trek. So I wanted to accelerate, and at that exact day, when we arrived in the afternoon to our next accommodation, that's when I started to have these symptoms. And when my guide told me, maybe we should stay longer here, and then the following day, no.
So, you're stubborn.
Yeah, let's sleep over it. And basically that's what all I needed, a good sleep, because the nights before, like after 2-3 hours of sleep, maybe it's the fresh air in the mountains, that I was super energized. I didn't feel like physically I'm worn out because of the lack of sleep. But that's exactly what I needed. And the next morning I was feeling much better. So we carried on due to the second original plans.
So what was the highest altitude that you reached? Do you recall the number?
Yeah, that was the base camp, or the final destination, 5,340 meters.
Which is Everest Base Camp.
Yes.
So did you say that it took you more or less just sleeping during the night for your headache to go away and your shortness of breath to go away? So you acclimatized literally in a day to that level of altitude?
Yeah. If I compare it to my experiences in South America, when from northern Chile, I took a flight to Bolivia. There, the difference was 1,000 meters, but it was a sudden movement, so like a 1 hour long flight. And that was worse than in the Himalayas, when it was a gradual, not a sudden.
Yeah, because your body is adjusting every minute rather than being thrown into a new climate in an instant. Very interesting. I'm curious, when you go on a hike like this, what kind of equipment or clothing is completely necessary? Again, being from Australia, before I moved to the Northern Hemisphere, I didn't even really own a winter jacket because that's not necessary in Australia. When you go to mountainous areas, a winter jacket is maybe not even enough. So what kind of equipment and clothing did you bring with you to walk in the Himalaya?
Okay, so before I left from Hungary, and I had it in my head that I would go climbing, I bought this water filtering bottle just in case for any scenarios or emergency cases. But due to clothing, so because I started my trip in Thailand and in Malaysia, where
hot
30 degrees, I didn't want to bring winter stuff with me, but I knew that once I get to Nepal and I want to go in the mountains, I will need to hire some stuff. At least I thought I could hire, because in Peru it wasn't a problem before my trekking. You could hire boots, layers, or ponchos, raincoats, anything. And that was my expectation in a country which is based on tourism and hiking. And no,
all right.
Basically you most of the stuff you are supposed to buy. But I was lucky enough, my tour guide, he borrowed me a pair of these Gore-Tex trousers. Then I bought a winter jacket, but I had nice hiking boots with me. However, they weren't waterproof. They weren't super good quality ones, but I thought they would be fine. So due to my minimalism, because I don't like buying and accumulating stuff, that I had this idea just to borrow things or maybe leave things behind once I use them. So at the end, I managed to get all the necessary layers, like you need several layers. And it was interesting. 6 degrees But after a few 100 meters of climbing with it was maximum 10 kilograms, my backpack. Yes, you're in t-shirt.
Yeah, you get hot.
Yeah, but then weather changes. So like suddenly one minute it's sunny and warm, and then there are clouds and snow coming behind you. So you have to be well equipped in this sense.
So you'd recommend a decent quality of boots, hopefully waterproof.
Yes.
Maybe Gore-Tex trousers, which are waterproof as well, and then layers are important in the mountains.
Yes, everything should be waterproof, gloves, everything. Luckily, it was mostly the nights when it was raining, and that's why it's recommended to start your treks early morning, and by the time you get to your next spot, then it either starts snowing or raining, but it's always unpredictable, the weather, so you have to be well prepared. And yes, the places, the tea houses where we stayed for the nights, they provided, because they weren't rammed. I could have 2 blankets instead of one. I was carrying my sleeping bag, which I didn't really need until a certain height and degree, like minus 15 was the lowest temperature, as far as I remember. Yeah, they were cold nights. They didn't really heat up the places where we stayed, only from the morning. So you had to be very well wrapped for the night.
Of course. Did you say minus 15, 1-5?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure you've lived through many colder days than that growing up in Hungary.
Yes, when I was a child, we had really cold winters. Not anymore. They are too mild, and it's scary.
Yeah.
But I loved when we had lots of snow, and it was fun.
After you came back from this trip in the Himalaya, you sent me a link to one of your videos that you created from all the different photographs you took and the video that you took.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. You put a nice soundtrack to it, and I'll put a link in the show notes of the podcast for that video as well, if you want me to.
Nice. Sure, thanks.
I was wondering, was there a particular moment or a particular place on your journey that stands out in your memory as a moment of epiphany, or a moment of a eureka moment where you had a new thought, or you felt an inspiration, or you just were overcome by the beauty of the area you were in?
Well, the whole experience was like incredible, being surrounded by all these giant things called mountains, and the highest things on planet Earth. That was marvelous itself. Also the vibe of the Buddhist monasteries, when one day after a lunch we could pop in to see what happens, and watching those monks pray, meditating, drinking their yak butter teas, and spiritually it was very, very an uplifting moment. But I had a very hard, tough few hours after reaching the base camp, because I was stubborn enough again to go there on my own, by myself, without my guide. From the tea house where we stayed that day, it was about an hour and a half away. But it was too late when I set off to trek on this rocky, not very safe terrain, because you sleep at one point and then you can stay there. And if no one is around, my tour, because I knew he didn't really like the Everest Base Camp. It was kind of, after 20 years, it was kind of boring for him to do the same trek. So I told him, don't worry, stay here, you rest, and I go myself. So that's what happened. He showed me basically which paths to take in the moraines next to these glaciers. You will recognize this shape of rocks, so you will be fine. And I believed I would be fine. I was too self-confident. I'm usually not, but when I face these kind of challenges, I'm too brave and yes, maybe crazy. And I learned my lesson because I reached the base camp, took the necessary selfies to prove that yes, I did it. Mm-hmm. And on the way back, I lost the path, and then it got dark. So basically what happened is I got lost in the dark over 5,000 meters. It was the scariest experience in my life. I was thinking for a few minutes, however, the survival instinct switched on, but I thought, okay, I might stay here and tomorrow someone will find me being frozen on these rocks, because I don't know how I lost the track, because it's not a hard thing to remember the same route, but somehow maybe...
Do you think of the altitude sickness? Your brain wasn't thinking properly?
Yes, it messes with your brain. Now that I think back, it's very easy to lose, even when you're in a state of mind, when you focus on something, somehow you can really lose the track. Wow. And that's what happened. So I had my dad's phone with me because the freezing cold killed one phone. Mm-hmm. I had a backup phone with me with maps, and so I thought I'm well prepared. I lost my head torch, or I left it behind. So
oh no!
The moon was, so I had a clear sky after a little bit of snowing. I had a clear sky above me. It was 7:00, and I should have gotten back the accommodation 2 hours earlier, but I was still in the middle of these glaciers and rocky bits trying to find my way. And the map was messed up as well on the phone. So anything that could mean a hardship that happened. But then I sat down for 1 minute and tried to focus on the positive things and what can help me to bring myself back to the place, because I was pretty sure by then that they started seeking for me. My guide must have been really worried, very sick. So I was basically starting to climb on these very unstable rocks and stones, trying to find, to get on top of a mountain to see if I can see any lights from a village. Yeah. But it took me at least an hour by the time because I climbed up a peak and it was just fog around me. But at the end, I spotted some lights from a certain destination, and it turned out that I went way ahead.
You took a wrong turn.
Maybe a kilometer longer than I should have. So I should have turned.
Oh man!
Before I did. So that was crazy, and those moments, I think, what I learned is don't mess with nature. You'd rather, it's stronger than you, and you should learn to contribute with it instead of fighting it. And that's what I promised to myself before this trip, that respect the mountains, because you don't know what difficulties you can get during your trip.
Yeah. What did your guide say to you when you returned?
He was very angry.
Why? Was he thinking you were a bit too cocky, and he said, "You see what happens when you don't respect the mountain"?
Yes, he was very happy that I returned safe and sound and nothing happened to me, because it could have ended with a tragedy. But but he was happy. But the next day we were just walking next to each other in a silent mode. Everyone was shocked, or I was still shocked. It took me time to digest all this, because now when I talk about it, it doesn't seem that extreme, but it was. I mean, I could have gotten frozen there if I stopped moving. I had to physically keep myself moving to stay alive.
That's crazy. I mean, that sort of is like what you get in the movies, that kind of stuff. Getting lost on a mountainside in the Himalaya. Did you have any kind of emotional or spiritual breakthrough from that experience?
Well, this was really emotional. I mean, I'm very grateful to myself that I survived. At first, I felt like I'm a failure, but then after chatting to some people who had some similar experiences and stories, okay, maybe I'm a hero. So I changed the perspective, and even today I think about it like not just an average travel, but something that I think that day I became very wise in a short period of time. I felt like I got older as well, maybe 20 years older, due to that stress.
I suppose it's a good advertisement for the guides too, because the guide lets you go by yourself for one day and you get lost. So it's like, make sure you have a guide, because otherwise this bad thing might happen to you.
Exactly. And I asked him, has anything similar happened in your 20-year-long experience as a travel guide? And he says, no, you're the first. You're the first one, and I really hope that you're the last one as well.
He doesn't need to have another heart attack.
Exactly.
Zsófia, would you recommend this kind of adventure, and why?
Definitely. I believe traveling and this kind of adventure traveling is not for everyone. For a long time, I thought about myself as someone who just likes staying in the same comfort home environment. But until I stepped out of this comfort zone, I realized how much more I am capable of. So it's a great therapy, could be a great therapy. For me, at least, traveling is something that shows you not only different perspectives of life about yourself. You can learn a lot about yourself when you end up in these new situations, new environments. You get in contact with strangers. You share stories, ideas, and views about life. I think the answer to that good old question, what actually makes us happy, or how we could or should live our lives, the answer lies within different cultures. And if you are exposed to live in these different worlds, then you become more open-minded, more flexible, resilient, patient towards yourself, towards others, no more prejudices. That's what I don't like in today's world, hatred towards each other. We don't even want to listen to others. We have our opinion, strong, harsh opinions, and that's it. So it opens a lot, opens up a whole new world. I recommend it basically to everyone who's at least a little bit an adventurous soul. And I can't wait to carry on, get back on the traveling track.
My favorite 4. What is your favorite souvenir?
Something that's either crafted, it can be food or handmade something from...
I suppose for somebody who's a minimalist, collecting souvenirs is not really something that you do.
No.
You're the same as me.
No, that's why I'm struggling now, because the other day I told my partner don't buy me anything. Instead, just cook a nice meal or, experiences. I don't need things, material.
Yeah, you're the same
stuff.
as me.
So, yeah, that's why it's a hard question.
That's a hard question.
So, experiences.
Yeah. What is your favorite language?
I love the sound of Spanish, how melodic it is. And traveling in South America, I decided I would learn this language properly. It haven't happened yet, but I would love to one day speak Spanish.
Beautiful. Conveniently, what is your favorite walk or hike?
But so far, the Himalaya trip.
What is your favorite film?
Favorite film? I don't have one favorite, but I loved Catch Me If You Can with DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. Great movie, but 7 Years in Tibet, for example, is another great one.
My favorite 4. My final question, before I let you ask me a couple of questions, considering you're a journalist and this is what you do. Obviously, at the moment, traveling is basically impossible. All the borders are closed, flights are rare. Do you have any plans for your next trip at the moment?
No plans, because I'm still in not insecurity, but we'll see what happens. At the moment, I'm not planning anything yet. I know once I can start traveling again, it will be Europe. I want to explore more, because I live in a small country. I don't even know my own country, and there are many great places I would love to visit. So I would love to travel around Europe by train. We'll see what happens in the next couple of months.
Will any of these destinations involve hiking?
Not necessarily. If I go for another hiking trip, that would be Kilimanjaro, so that I can start covering all the continents. But it's just a dream, but who knows? It might turn to reality as sudden as the Himalaya trip was.
Brilliant. All right. Well, if you want to ask me a couple of questions, I suppose now is as good a time as ever.
Okay. So you started traveling in your 20s and have been to many places. So I guess you are a well-experienced adventurer, not like me. How much do you think traveling can be a life-changing, or at least a personality-shaping experience, or we might as well say an intense therapy?
I think you already touched on this idea about travel being, like you said, a therapy. But what you said about going to different places and seeing different things and experiencing different cultures, at the same time, travel will educate you about other people and also yourself. So I think you already sort of answered your own question in that way, because I agree with everything you said. Mm-hmm. For me, my travels have definitely changed me and helped me to grow into a better version of myself. Mm-hmm. And that's been from placing myself in new situations, in foreign situations, where at times I felt uncomfortable. But the same situation today, as compared to when I first started traveling, I'm not uncomfortable anymore, because my comfort zone has expanded. Mm-hmm. And at this time in my life, I'm thinking I need to expand it even further. So my thinking now is, where do I have to go to challenge myself again, like I was challenged 10 years ago, 11 years ago in my very early traveler days? Yeah, you're right. Travel is something that I think everyone should try and see if they can discover a better version of themselves, and at the same time drop down their barriers that have been put up by their own cultures about how other people maybe are, and see for themselves if that's true or not.
Could you name 3 life lessons that your first big trip taught to you? What are your most important conclusions and wisdoms you gained as a globetrotter? Or
Yeah, I think be more outgoing is a lesson I learned very quickly, because I nearly always travel solo, and I'm quite happy to be on my own, but I don't particularly like being lonely. If you want to meet people, especially when you don't know anyone, you have to be outgoing. You have to introduce yourself. You have to smile. You have to be friendly. You have to make connections with people. I have definitely improved in the way I do that because of traveling, because I forced myself and I pushed myself beyond my comfort zone to be more outgoing. So that's definitely one thing. Another thing is I've learned to be more patient, because when you're traveling, you're obviously reliant on other things a lot. You have to wait for the bus. You have to wait for the train. You have to wait for somebody at the bank to change your money. You have to be patient and polite. And that's something that I think we all can improve on, I suppose. But there are times when I was younger where I didn't have that much patience. And that was a quality I didn't like about myself. And so, and I still think I could be more patient. I think everybody can always improve. And another thing would be, and this is something I've always known, because it's in scriptures, and it says, if you don't ask, you won't get anything. Traditionally, I'm a very shy person. People don't believe me when I say that, but it's true. And the way I am now is because I've been trying to become a better version of myself with time. But one lesson I learned in California when I was on one of my first big trips traveling solo, I just heard these 2 guys talking about the idea of planning a road trip across California. And I just was thinking, I really want to do that. So I just said to them, hey guys, can I join in on your road trip, please? And they said, yeah, sure, come in and help us plan it. And so I ended up kind of jumping in on these 2 guys who were planning a road trip, and it became our road trip instead of their road trip that I was joining in. We all just owned it together, and I ended up doing a lot of the driving, which was really empowering, especially because I'd never driven on the other side of the road before in a different country, in a car, a big car that I'd never driven before, a big Jeep. So yeah, I just learned that don't be shy, be outgoing, and ask, because if you don't ask, nothing's ever going to happen. So yeah, there's 3 things.
Fantastic. And what about time traveling right now in this current situation? Would you time travel? If so, in what age would you travel to? How long would you stay there, and why?
Yeah, I've actually talked about this before back in Australia. This question is kind of not strictly time traveling. I would like to go back to, maybe Georgian days, so sort of 200 years ago. But when I say that, I'd like to be fairly rich because those days would have been so bad for poor people, because poverty was a problem. And so all the cool things you see on British TV from these period dramas and the really immaculate and eccentric clothes that they wear and the tea parties they have and the nice huge houses they live in, these are all very, very rich people. And so if I went back to that time, I would like to have money. That's it.
That were my 3 questions.
So I guess the last thing to do is to say thank you very much.
I thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
And hope to see you face to face soon again.
Because I owe you a cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for listening to the Nostalgic Vagabond. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation. And if you would like to listen to other interesting talks on travel, there are more podcasts available. Check them out wherever you get your podcasts. And for updates, just follow me at the Nostalgic V. Don't forget, your journey is special. Own it. I've been Alan Hill. Until next time. Hey guys, if you enjoy listening to the Nostalgic Vagabond, why not support the podcast? If you haven't already, subscribe and you'll be notified when new eps drop. You can also support the podcast by leaving a rating or a review on your podcast app. Why not share this episode? Tell your friends about it if something resonated with you. Word of mouth is great promotion. If you're into social media, maybe post a screenshot of the episode or upload the link on your profile so your mates can see what interesting content you've been into lately. All your support comes straight back and helps to keep the travel content and nostalgia of this podcast going. Cheers. So don't forget to subscribe.